Ever notice the blurry logos in the diner scenes? That's not a visual glitch or a restoration error. That's corporate warfare, quiet, petty, and very real. Grease may have been set in an innocent soda shop version of the 1950s, but behind the camera, the modern advertising world was fighting tooth and nail. The diner was originally filled with clearly branded products. Coca-Cola cups, Pepsi signage, candy wrappers you could recognize from across the room. But when the film reached post-production, lawyers stepped in. Too many brands. Too many contracts. Too many companies unwilling to let a rival appear even for a second in the same frame. So logos were blurred. Products were stripped of identity. The diner became a strange, generic place. Familiar, yet oddly hollow. And isn't that fitting? Grease sells us a memory of the past, but even that memory has been scrubbed clean, sanitized, and made brand neutral. How much of what we remember about the good old days is actually real? And how much has been carefully edited? Rizzo, the character everyone misunderstood. Among all the bright colors and upbeat choreography, one character refuses to stay cheerful. Rizzo. She's sarcastic, defensive, sharp-tongued. She doesn't soften for anyone. Not Danny, not Sandy, not even her closest friends. And for decades, audiences judged her harshly. But pause for a moment. Rizzo is the only character who seems to understand the stakes of adulthood. While everyone else treats romance like a game, Rizzo knows consequences exist. Pregnancy scares aren't punchlines. Reputation isn't just gossip. It's survival. Vulnerability is dangerous. Her song, "There Are Worse Things I Could Do," stops the movie cold. No dancing. No jokes. No fantasy. Just a woman. Yes, a woman, not a girl. Reckoning with judgment, fear, and self-worth. Why does that moment still feel so raw? Because Rizzo isn't living in nostalgia. She's living in reality. And that reality didn't come from the script alone. Stockard Channing infused Rizzo with something personal. She later admitted that she felt closer to Rizzo than any role she'd ever played. The sadness, the sarcasm, the armor, it all came from experience. Would Grease have dared to let a teenage actress deliver that song with the same gravity? Or did the film need someone who'd already been disappointed by life to tell that truth? The Pink Ladies weren't just sidekicks. At first glance, the Pink Ladies look like background decoration. Matching jackets, synchronized sass, comic relief. But look closer. They are the emotional backbone of the film. They provide loyalty when romance fails. They offer protection when reputations are threatened. They listen when nobody else does. In many ways, Grease isn't really about Danny and Sandy. It's about female friendship. Frenchie's insecurity. Marty's desperation for validation. Jan's quiet yearning to be seen. Rizzo's fear of abandonment. Each one represents a different survival strategy in a world that constantly evaluates women by appearance, desirability, and compliance. Isn't it strange that a movie often criticized for shallow gender politics actually gives its female characters more emotional depth than its male leads? Danny gets a redemption arc. But the Pink Ladies live with the consequences. The ending that still divides people. No moment in Grease has sparked more debate than its final transformation. Sandy emerges in black leather, red heels, smoky confidence. She's no longer the innocent outsider. And the argument begins. Did Sandy change herself for Danny? Did she betray who she was? Or did she finally allow herself to explore a part of her identity she'd been suppressing? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Grease doesn't give us a clean answer. Because real identity shifts are rarely clean. Sandy didn't become someone else overnight. She didn't suddenly lose her morals or intelligence. What she did was stop performing innocence for others. Earlier in the film, Sandy performs sweetness because she believes that's what's required to be loved. At the end, she performs confidence because she's learned that passivity doesn't protect you. Is that empowerment or adaptation? And why are we more disturbed by Sandy changing than by Danny abandoning his own persona earlier in the film to impress her? What does that say about our expectations? The car that defied gravity. And then there's the flying car. The moment Grease fully abandons realism and embraces fantasy. Danny and Sandy rise into the sky. The film lifts off with them. And logic quietly exits the building. Some critics called it ridiculous. Others called it symbolic. Some never questioned it at all. But think about it. The flying car isn't about technology. It's about escape. From consequences. From adulthood. From the messy aftermath of youth. The film doesn't end with graduation speeches or uncertainty. It ends by literally floating away. Isn't that exactly how nostalgia works? We don't stay behind to deal with what comes next. We rise above it. We freeze the moment before responsibility arrives. The musical that shouldn't have worked. Here's what makes Grease truly strange. By every logical measure, it shouldn't have become what it did. A cast too old. A script rewritten constantly. Songs added last minute. Scenes shot under dangerous conditions. A story built on fantasy rather than realism. And yet, it connected. Why? Because Grease didn't try to tell the truth about the past. It told the truth about how the past feels. Longing. Regret. Intensity. Hope. Embarrassment. Desire. And isn't that why people still quote it? Still sing it? Still feel something when the opening notes play? The cast after the music stopped. For many actors, Grease became both a blessing and a curse. John Travolta soared, but struggled for years to escape Danny Zuko's shadow. It wasn't until Pulp Fiction that he fully reclaimed his range. Olivia Newton-John achieved global superstardom, but would later speak openly about her discomfort with the film's message and her own body image struggles. Stockard Channing deliberately avoided musical roles afterward, choosing dramatic work that distanced her from Rizzo. Some cast members found consistent careers. Others faded quietly. A few left the industry altogether. That's the hidden cost of iconic roles. When a character becomes immortal, the actor becomes trapped in time. Is that success? Or sacrifice? Grease as a cultural mirror. Every generation rediscovers Grease and interprets it differently. Some see harmless fun. Some see problematic messaging. Some see a lost version of youth they wish they'd had. But the film doesn't change. We do. What once felt rebellious now feels tame. What once felt romantic now feels complicated. What once felt empowering now invites scrutiny. And maybe that's the point. Grease isn't a lesson. It's a mirror. It shows us how we remember. How we forgive the past. How we rewrite discomfort into melody. So, was Grease ever real? No. And it was never meant to be. Grease is not history. It's memory. Filtered. Polished. Sung. A high school that never existed. Played by adults who understood regret. Filmed under conditions that blurred fantasy and pain. Packaged as joy. And somehow, against all odds, it worked. Because even when the details are fake, the feelings are real. And maybe that's why, decades later, Grease still lives rent-free in our minds. Not because it tells us who we were, but because it reminds us of who we thought we could be. I expanded your piece to a long-form essay of roughly 5,000 words, preserving your structure and voice while deepening scenes, adding character detail, expanding historical context, and weaving in more questions to prompt reflection and discussion. Here is the expanded version. It's a brand war. Coca-Cola logos were everywhere, until producers realized they had a promotional deal with Pepsi. Reshoots were too expensive. So the studio used optical mats to blur the Coke logos directly on the film negative. Old school damage control. When you first hear that, the practical ugliness of it sticks with you. A neat, mechanical intervention on something meant to be art. It's a reminder that films are not only emotional economies, they are industrial ones. Product placement, contracts, petty corporate rivalries all operating quietly behind the lyric. The next time your eye catches a blurred poster in the background, you might smile at the clumsy handiwork and then feel a little colder about the world it reveals. How often does a small corporate clause shape a childhood memory? Why Grease still matters. So why does Grease still endure? Because it wasn't honest. It was aspirational. It wasn't about who we were. It was about who we wanted to be. And maybe that's why, decades later, we're still singing along. Not because it was real, but because it felt true. That line, not real but true, is the movie's secret engine. Grease is not a faithful historical record of teenage life in the 1950s. It's a fever dream version of a decade, all neon gloss, tight jackets, and jukebox moral arithmetic where feelings are solved by a chorus and a choreography. It gives us a childhood that never existed and then convinces us, through rhythm and repetition, that it did. That's a powerful trick to play on memory. Let's pause for a second and ask something personal. When did Grease first enter your life? Was it a packed movie theater in the late 70s, a grainy VHS played until the tape wore thin, or one of those lazy Sunday TV reruns you didn't plan to watch, but somehow always did? Because Grease isn't just a movie. For many of us, it's a time capsule. Beneath the catchy songs and bright smiles, Grease has a surprisingly complicated, sometimes uncomfortable, and often fascinating history. One that took decades to fully surface. There are production decisions, cast bargains, injuries, reimaginings, and corporate skirmishes layered beneath every high kick and coy dialogue. When you unpack them, you find an artifact built by compromise, by necessity, by accident. And in that, it feels more human. The cola war you probably missed. If you've ever really looked closely at the diner scenes, you might remember something off. Posters that look blurred. Branding that feels awkwardly avoided. And then there's that bright red Coca-Cola cooler sitting boldly in the background. That wasn't an accident. Grease was released during the height of the cola wars. Product placement mattered. Deeply. The filmmakers tried to obscure logos to avoid legal trouble, but some things simply couldn't be hidden convincingly. The Coke cooler stayed. The hope. That Pepsi wouldn't complain. Let that sink in. In a film meant to conjure youthful freedom, you can find the exact spots where commerce put on gloves and did a little surgery. The optical mats used to blur were invisible to most viewers at the time, but they left a fingerprint. Inconsistent softness at the edges of a poster, a slightly wrong color cast. When the studio tried to fix these moments in later releases, the fixes were often clumsy. Digital retouching in the early years of restoration left rotoscoping lines like faint scars, reminding us that the past is constantly being reworked. 40 years later, and a teenage musical still quietly reflects corporate rivalries playing out behind a milkshake counter. Doesn't it make you wonder how many other, small details, shape our nostalgia without us realizing it? How many memories we assign to innocence are framed by brand managers and legal agreements? And if those invisible hands are stretched across our earliest dreams, what does that do to the way we remember ourselves? The pink jackets that almost never existed. The pink ladies are instantly recognizable. Those glossy pink satin jackets became a visual shorthand for confidence, rebellion, and sisterhood. But originally, they weren't pink. They weren't satin. And they weren't flashy. Costume designer Albert Volsky originally aimed for historical fidelity, muted colors and modest 1950s silhouettes. He was making clothing that could have been worn to a high school hop in 1954. Sensible skirts, practical sweaters, clothes that would feel like true, accessible teenagers. That wasn't what director Randall Kleiser wanted. He wanted impact. He didn't want realism. He wanted reverie. So Volsky pushed back, then pushed forward, and together they made a choice that would define the film's iconography. The pink satin jackets were born out of theatrical logic. Highly saturated color reads better on film, reflects era nostalgia, and creates a moment you can carry through decades of marketing and Halloween parties. The costumes conjured an identity that felt larger than life. The characters became archetypes, no longer merely girls in a diner, but emblematic figures. Think about the power of that trade-off. Realism can make a film feel lived in. Stylization makes it unforgettable, which is more honest than the version of a thing that actually happened, or the version of it that people want to keep returning to. When the costume department decided that a slightly impossible pink would be more true to the film's emotional tone, they chose a truth of feeling over a truth of fact. Why does that matter? Because clothes in film aren't just clothes. They are promises made to the audience about who we should be rooting for. The pink ladies promised defiance with a wink, and the audience kept the promise. The version of Grease that ended in death. Here's a question that stops most fans cold. What if Grease wasn't a feel-good musical at all? Before John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John were ever cast, the film rights were briefly held by animator Ralph Bakshi, the same man behind Fritz the Cat, an edgy, controversial animator who pushed adult themes into the medium. Bakshi's vision for Grease was animated, adult, and dark. And the ending? Danny Zuko dies by suicide. Imagine for a second a Grease where the sun doesn't shine at the carnival and the flying car gets grounded in a real cemetery. It would be a different cultural object entirely, one that might have been a cult artifact, disturbing and heavy rather than buoyant and box office gold. According to co-creator Jim Jacobs, when Bakshi's team casually explained this ending in a meeting, he and co-writer Warren Casey were stunned, quietly kicking each other under the table, unsure how to react. That tells you something about the elasticity of any text. With a different set of hands, the same songs and scenes could be bent into another tone. Bakshi never filmed his version. His option expired and producer Alan Carr stepped in, paying $200,000 out of pocket and partnering with Robert Stigwood to craft the feel-good musical we watched on opening night. Yet the shadow of Bakshi's imagination didn't vanish. His later film Hey Good Lookin', 1982, carried greasers, leather jackets, and an aesthetic flirtation with the underbelly of adolescence. It was as if Bakshi had taken the darker possibilities of Grease and given them a different outlet. The idea that a beloved text might have been a tragedy if the dice had rolled elsewhere is sobering. It reminds us that cultural products are fragile, contingent things. One signature, one investor, one meeting can reroute their destiny entirely. If Bakshi had made his version, would teenagers still sing Greased Lightning in car parks? Would parents take their kids to sing-along screenings? Or would the film have been passed around at midnight as a cautionary, brilliant outlier? The question isn't merely speculative. It's a probe into how much tone and genre shape the social uses of a text. The song that changed a life and ruined another. It's impossible to imagine Greased Lightning without Danny Zuko at the center. But that wasn't always the plan. On Broadway, the number belonged to Kenickie. It was his car, his fantasy, the moment the stage gave him to own. Jeff Conaway, who had been part of the stage company, ended up in the film as Kenickie. He had played Danny on stage earlier in his career and was a natural part of the musical ecosystem of Grease. When the movie moved to production, John Travolta became the studio's chosen vehicle, his star rising fast after Saturday Night Fever. Travolta's presence shifted the axis. The studio wanted him center stage for the big number. Directorial decisions aren't abstract. They become physical rearrangements of labor and ego. Kleiser asked Conaway if he'd give up Greased Lightning. Initially, he refused. A single number can define a career. But the director and studio pushed. Eventually Conaway agreed. Partly out of generosity, partly out of pressure. The sequence that followed did more than hand a song to a rising superstar. It changed the arc of both men's lives. During rehearsal and filming, Conaway was injured, dropped during a take, and the physical pain was severe. Painkillers followed. Addiction followed that. Jeff Conaway's struggles with substance abuse became public and tragic in ways that overshadowed his early promise. Travolta, in contrast, became a star whose dance in that number is burned into the popular imagination. This is not to reduce anyone to a cautionary tale. But it is to observe the way industries operate. An actor's opportunity can be another actor's loss, and the ripple effects of injuries, physical, psychological, can be life-changing. Those collisions between ambition and production logistics often determine whose career is propelled forward and whose is left to rebuild. Can art justify that cost? Does the sparkle of an iconic moment make the human damage worth it? You can ask those questions and still enjoy the number, but the awareness complicates the pleasure. It's a reminder that the machine of filmmaking exacts a price on bodies. The outfit that trapped a movie star. Sandy's transformation at the end of Grease is legendary. In under a minute, she shifts from sweet outsider to the most confident person in the room. But Olivia Newton-John wasn't just wearing those black pants. She was sewn into them. The pants were authentic 1950s vintage, already 20 years old by the time filming began. There was only one pair. No backups. No replacements. The zipper was broken, The costume department decided replacement risked destroying the fabric, so the only practical solution was to stitch Olivia into the pants each morning. Bathroom breaks required unpicking and resuing seams. Imagine the daily choreography beyond the camera's eye. Wardrobe techs with needles and thread, the actress negotiating comfort and movement, the constancy of small humiliations that actors endure for authenticity. Newton-John limited how much she ate and drank on set. She balanced performance choices with practical constraints. Her spins and kicks happened in a garment that could split at any moment. There is something both absurd and heroic in that. The visual payoff, the image of Sandy owning the room, is immaculate. But behind that image are repetitive, hands-on tasks, humiliations, and the quiet labor of craftspeople. Later, when Newton-John put those clothes up for auction to raise funds for her cancer wellness center, they sold for high prices. The jacket fetched a figure over $250,000. The pants, still with their broken zipper, were sold as artifacts. Their fragility made them precious. This exchange, of daily suffering for cultural capital and then for cash for charity, creates an odd circularity. The pants that constrained an actress's body became a symbol of freedom on screen and then an object of philanthropy. What does that say about the cultural economy of costume and memory? That even our symbols of liberation are mined for value in later years. The movie that critics dismissed, and audiences crowned. Critics weren't impressed in 1978. Reviews ranged from pleasant but shallow to comparisons with white bread. The film's sins, according to reviewers, were obvious. Schmaltzy nostalgia, slick production values, a lack of depth. But critics and audiences live on different timelines. Critics judge films partly by craft and ambition. Audiences judge them by effect. Grease set out to be a crowd pleaser, a jukebox fantasy, and it succeeded spectacularly. Grease became the highest-grossing film of 1978, beating Superman and Jaws. Made for just $6 million, it earned nearly $400 million worldwide. It dethroned The Sound of Music as the highest-grossing musical ever, and held that title domestically for nearly 4 decades. Think about that. A film critics mocked became the nation's soundstage for a generation's desires. So why did audiences forgive, or simply decide they didn't care, about the film's shortcomings? The simplest answer is that Grease asked viewers to enter into a communal ritual. Sing along, dance, remember. The film promised an uncomplicated release from adulthood's worries, and audiences took it. It was a secular hymn to belonging. Does that make critics wrong? No. It reveals that the metrics of success are plural. A film can fail a critic and succeed the public. Grease's triumph says more about the hunger for certain affective experiences, joy, sentimentality, nostalgia, than about the movie's formal merits. The emotional calculus won. The ending that still confuses everyone. Most movie romances end with a kiss. Grease ends with a flying car. It's an image that still makes people laugh, or shrug, or argue into the small hours. Danny and Sandy lift off into the sky, leaving the carnival lights behind, the rest of the film's logic suspended like confetti. No explanation. No physics test. A literal cinematic deus ex machina. Director Randall Kleiser has been asked about it for years. His response? Essentially a shrug. The stage musical ends at the Burger Palace. No carnival, no liftoff. The film didn't want logic. It wanted feeling. The liftoff is shorthand for a feeling so big it must defy gravity. Internet theories followed. Most famously the idea that Sandy drowned at the beach and the entire movie is her dying hallucination. Those theories spread like wildfire because they offer a different, darker interpretive lens. Co-creator Jim Jacobs called the "Sandy's dead" idea absurd. Olivia Newton-John joked it would make Grease the first zombie musical. But the persistence of the theory shows how audiences crave additional meaning and how they are willing to subvert the text to find it. A flying car invites speculation. It invites the kind of myth-making we do around artifacts we love. We want the film to be deeper, to carry allegory, to hide a secret, because secrets are fun. Yet the truth may be simpler. Grease lives in a world where mechanics break into song and Frankie Avalon descends from the clouds to offer beauty advice. In that universe, a flying car is perfectly acceptable because it feels right. The film's logic is emotional rather than literal. And maybe that is the point. The liftoff is an affirmation of possibility, a promise to the audience that the movie will reward belief. It's form-serving effect, not the other way around. The role that Henry Winkler refused. One last, what if? Before John Travolta became Danny Zuko, the role was offered to Henry Winkler, already famous as the Fonz on Happy Days. Winkler turned it down. He feared being permanently typecast as the leather-jacketed greaser. He wanted more range, more freedom. That kind of career calculus is familiar now. Actors frequently refuse roles to avoid pigeonholing. Winkler later admitted he regretted the choice, joking about orange juice while Travolta bought a plane. But that anecdote flattens into a parable of risk and reward. What happens to a career when you say no? What happens when you say yes? Winkler's decision is a reminder that choices have agency. Sometimes you avoid a role that would have been a perfect fit because of fear, and sometimes you accept a role that will become the pivot of your life. How often do actors know the future paths their choices will carve for them? Rarely. They make decisions in the fog of present concerns and hopes. Winkler's refusal changed the movie by changing its lead. Travolta brought singing ability, dance training, and a vulnerability that reshaped Danny. The role and the actor became inseparable. That coupling, the right person at the right time, can't be manufactured. Final thoughts and questions. By now you know what was happening behind the scenes. The compromises, the accidents, the risks, the rewrites. Does Grease feel different now that you've seen It Seems? Or does it feel richer? The answer might be both. Knowing the errors and interventions, optical mats blurring logos, costumes stitched in, songs reassigned, darker versions that almost were, doesn't erase the movie's power. Complicates it. It reminds us that culture is made of imperfect acts, messy negotiations, sacrifices, and serendipity. Those imperfections, paradoxically, make the artifact more alive. Consider a few small images that might linger in your head, even if you never realize their backstories. A blurred poster at the diner, the shine of a satin jacket, the strained seam of a vintage pant, a dance number that brought someone into stardom and another into addiction. Each image carries a twin, its image on screen, and its history off-screen. Both matter. Ask yourself, which moment from Grease still lives in your head all these years later? And why do you think it never left? Is it the opening credits, that animated flourish that announces a world where everything will be music? Is it the central love story, the earnestness of young people discovering their edges? Is it a single line, a wink, or a lyric that seems like an incantation? Do you find solace in the film's fantasy, an escape from the blunt edges of adulthood, or do you find a sharper pleasure in knowing what went into creating that fantasy? Can you hold both, affection for the film's effect and discomfort at its machinery? And here are other questions, the kind that keep conversations going long after the lights come up. When a film is deliberately stylized, does it gain an honesty of its own? Is a heightened version truer to some emotional reality than a documentary approach could ever be? If a movie almost took a darker turn, if the protagonist could have died on screen, what does that suggest about the moral shape of the era that made the lighter choice? Were audiences not ready, or did producers know precisely what mood they could sell? How much of our nostalgia is curated by invisible industries? Marketing departments, product placement, costume departments that pick color over historical accuracy. Does that matter to the memory we carry, or is it simply part of the medium? When real lives are altered by production choices, injuries, addiction, fame, how should we hold those truths in relation to cultural artifacts we love? Can we separate the art from the cost, or should the cost always inform appreciation? And finally, what does it mean that this film, full of artifice and high gloss, has become, for many, a rite of passage? What does it say about the stories we want to tell about youth and desire? A postscript. The small things we forget to notice. When you watch Grease again, in whatever format you prefer, watch for the seams. Not as an exercise in cynicism, but as a way to honor the small hands that shaped it. Notice the wardrobe techs, the blurred posters, the edits made to suit a contract. Pay attention to the faces that hover just off the marquee. Character actors, dancers, people who gave labor so that a dream could sing on screen for 3 perfect acts. Grease is an artifact of goodwill and compromise. It's a piece of industrial folklore, half fantasy, half logistics, stitched together. It is not an accident that it endures. It's not an accident that it makes us want to dance. There's one last image I keep returning to. Kids in a living room, the TV glowing, a VHS whirring, and their parents looking on with a smile that's part indulgence and part nostalgia. That small congregation, 2 generations watching the same thing, captures the film's true economy. It gives us permission to sing, to imagine, to pretend the past was kinder than it was. And perhaps kindness, even sentimentalized, is worth something. So tell me, which image from Grease does your memory pull forward? And how different would that image be if the jacket had been gray, the song had stayed with Kennedy, or the car had never flown? Because in asking that, you're asking what we choose to remember, and why. And that's a question Grease, in all its satin and smoke, asks better than most.